All right.
Welcome. This is Mishnah in Depth Masechet Nedarim with Rabbi David Silber. This class is a project of Drisha's Rivka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in Rivka's memory by her family. This class is designed to accompany independent daily study of the Mishnah following the Mishnah Yomit schedule. We meet weekly as a community of learners to augment our independent study, enhance our understanding of mishnayot learned, and support each other as a community of learners in this foundational text. This course is being taught by Rabbi David Silber. He is the dean and founder of Drisha, a published author on several books, including but not limited to For Such a Time as This, Biblical Reflections on the Book of Esther, and Malchut Adam, Iyun B'Sefer Shmuel. If you are joining us on Zoom, welcome. I'm going to send invitations to panelists so you can unmute yourself, ask questions directly, and bump in when you have questions. If you are on Facebook, welcome as well. Please feel welcome to ask questions. You can, on either platform, you can ask questions in chat and I will bring them to the attention of the teacher. All I ask is if you are joining us on Zoom as a panelist, to please mute yourself so that we do not hear any background noise that comes up when you're not speaking. Sources for today's class will come from Mishnah Nedarim. If you have your own copy, you are entirely welcome to follow along, and I will give you chapters for that. I will also share sources on screen from Sfario, and Rabbi Silber is quoting them. And with that, I want to hand things over with one important programming note. Next week, in observance of Purim, this class will not meet. We will meet the following week on March 31st. And with that, I want to hand things over to Rabbi Silber to get started.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. So again, next week we won't be meeting. We have to move quickly here. Okay. So I wanted to address a very basic question in this tractate Nedarim, one that many mishnayot are devoted to. We're not going to go over most of these mishnayot. In a certain sense, they're quite technical, but the principle is a very central principle to the whole tractate. And that is, it's the first, we'll discuss several topics today, but the first thing I wanted to mention, which is very basic, the Nedarim is about vows. That is to say, the way it's understood by the Mishnah, a person can make a vow to forbid something upon oneself which is not forbidden. I can say a certain food, these potatoes on my plate are like a sacrifice, a konam, korban. And then those potatoes become forbidden to me. They have the status, as it were, of a sacrifice. The Talmud discusses, I touch upon this very briefly, the Talmud discusses to what extent, if I say these potatoes are a sacrifice, these potatoes are a korban olah or a shlamim or whatever, then those potatoes become forbidden to me. The question that's raised by the Gemara, actually, which is fascinating, is to what extent, when I say these potatoes, or could be anything else, is like a sacrifice, how far do we go with that? For example, the question that's raised by the Talmud, actually quite amazing, when holy objects of the temple, they are forbidden to be used by people, other than their purpose. So a sacrifice is brought as a sacrifice, but the temple can also own property. It's called koche bedek habayit. And if I take that, if I use it for my own private use, it belongs to the temple. That's called me'ilah. Mem ayin yud lamed hey me'ilah. There's a whole tractate called Masechet Me'ilah. And what happens if you do me'ilah? Then the Torah says, and the Mishnah codifies it, you have to repay what you took. You have to add a fifth as a penalty, and you bring a special sacrifice, a korban asham. Okay, that's if misusing temple property. But what about if I say these potatoes are like a sacrifice, and then I eat the potatoes? So I've misused, as it were, something which had the status or quasi status of hegdish. The Gemara actually asked the question, in such a case, am I obligated? Is that considered me'ilah? Would I have to bring a sacrifice? What actually happens in such a case? So that's a question the Gemara raises. I mentioned this simply because to demonstrate to what extent the Talmud is taking this concept seriously, that the person actually can confer upon an object, which is perfectly permissible, the status of sacred objects. Yesh me'ila b'konamot or ein me'ila b'konamot. That's the question. Konamot is another word for neder. That question is raised by the Talmud in Tractate Nedarim, just to give you some sense of how seriously they're taking this idea. In any event, that's what a neder is. So a neder is through an act of speech, my speech, I can forbid something which, had I not spoken, is perfectly permissible. There's nothing wrong with it. On my plate of potatoes and meat and potatoes, and I can transform them into something forbidden. That's the idea of a neder.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, two things. One, and what do you need to do to those potatoes afterward? In other words, can they be thrown away, or do you have to deal with them in any special way?
That's an excellent question. I really never thought of that. It's a very good question. It never entered my mind that you can't just throw them away. No, you can't eat them, but I would have said they have no sanctity to them. I mean, even if you say yesh me'il b'konamot, to say they actually have, it's a very good question. I have to look into that. I mean, I always assume you can just throw them away. They have no sanctity. It's just they have the forbidden status of sacrifices. That's what I would say. They have the forbidden status of sacrifices. It's not actually a sacrifice. Potatoes are not a sacrifice. It doesn't have, sacrifices are different. In other words, when you have a carbon, maybe this is not true of property. If you have a sacrifice, the reason that it's holy is because it has a purpose.
Right.
It has a purpose. Now, with the temple property, doesn't really have a purpose per se. I mean, they probably do something with it. I don't know what they would do with it, but the fact of the matter is, I don't know the answer to that question. My gut tells me that you can't throw it away. If you throw it away, they're not going to eat it. It's only the question if you did eat it, what is the status? Because it's forbidden to me.
Because it's forbidden.
Yeah.
That's my first question. My second question is, but while learning this, while going through Nedarim, it seems to me that the focus very often is you've made a neder not to, and then what happens to go around it, to like evade that whole neder.
Right.
So what was the purpose in those days? Why did people make these nedarim? If it seems to me that the whole focus here is...
All right, so you raised a very, very basic question about the tractate. That is the basic question. I don't know how many more weeks we have. We lose a week with Purim, unfortunately. That is the subject in the last three chapters, actually. I mean, you raised the question you're raising. I'll address it briefly because I'm not sure how much we're going to get this. It's very basic. The last three chapters of the touched on a basic question. The last three chapters of Nedarim deal with getting out of Nedarim. One is called Hatarat Nedarim, which is one might say rabbinic understanding, but it's not in the text at all. The Torah seems to say the opposite. You can't get out of a neder. And then you have Hafarat Nedarim, which is in the Torah. That's if a woman took a vow, the husband or the father can annul the vow on the day that he hears it. That's called Hafarat Nedarim. Hatarat Nedarim. So you raised a very central question. Let me just briefly respond to it, just because I don't know how much time we're going to have given the missing that Purim week, and I finish the tractate pretty soon. So there is a tension. First of all, why somebody would make a neder is a good question. We already saw in the Mishnah. If you remember the mishnayot in the beginning of the tractate, it talks about Kenidre Rishayim. If someone this is forbidden to be like the neder of wicked people, the Mishnah says the neder is valid. It sounds like from the Mishnah that taking a neder is very problematic. There's a tension in the whole tractate. The Torah certainly allows the neder, and if you take the neder, it takes effect. But the question is it a good thing or not? We're dealing with the Mishnah. The Mishnah touches on it, but the Gemara deals with it in depth. There's a fight, disagreement whether the neder is in general not a good thing to do, but it could be a bad thing to do for two reasons. It could be a bad thing to do because you might not keep it. That's one possibility. But what if you did keep it? In other words, taking a vow might not be a good thing, but if you took a vow and you kept it, this object is forbidden for 30 days. And for 30 days, you didn't benefit from the object. You kept the vow. Now, was that a good thing you took the vow and kept it? Or it would have been better not to take the vow at all? That's a dispute in the Talmud, actually. But there's no question that taking the vow is seen, and the Mishnah seems to say is problematic, but it could be problematic for one of two reasons. One is you might not keep it. The other is, why do you make a vow in the first place? Potatoes are fine. Eat potatoes. We don't have enough restrictions. You need more restrictions. So that is a disagreement, okay? Now, there is a way out of it. Hatarat Nedarim is the way out. And then the question is, do we employ that or not? So let me just mention something that's a very interesting question, historical question. We have a neder and we have a shvua. The first Mishnah talks about the neder and the shvua, and we discussed the difference between them. Shvua is understood by the Mishnah to be, I take a vow not to eat potatoes. That's a shvua. A neder would be, these potatoes are forbidden to me. Potatoes are forbidden to me. Fine. Now, there are differences between a neder and a shvua. But one of the main differences is that a shvua, presumably, you invoke God's name. A neder, you don't. So the shvua there, for that reason alone, and maybe for other reasons, is more severe than a neder, more serious. There is an opinion in the Gaonim, it's not in the Gemara and it's not in the Mishnah, but within the Gaonim, they developed an approach that they are not matir shvuos. Hatarat Nedarim, yes. Hatarat shvuot, no. Now, the Shulchan Aruch does not follow that practice. The Shulchan Aruch permits hatarat shvuot, and in fact, in Kol Nidre, if you remember, we mentioned shvuot, but there is that opinion that shavua is not. There's no hatarat shvuah, maybe because you took it in God's name. So if you're annulling it, you're saying you took God's name in a certain sense in vain. That's one position. And then there are other positions about hatarat nedarim, what kind of nedarim we are matir or not. And there's a whole dispute about that. In other words, in the time of the Gaonim, which was, say, the year say, 750 to 1000 or something like that, there was a position that limited the extent to which we employ hatarat nedarim. Hatarat nedarim, yes, well, no, even nedarim. So within our tradition, there's an enormous fight, actually, exactly about the point that you raised. On one hand, neder is valid. On the other hand, maybe you shouldn't have taken it. On the other hand, if you let people simply get out of them, maybe that will encourage them to make more nedarim. They can always get out. I mean, this is the dispute. It's totally on the books in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a whole chapter about hatarat nedarim. So we do have that way out of it. And we also know that many nedarim, you don't even need hatarat nedarim. We saw that many nedarim are just in and of themselves invalid because you need to have full words of the Gemara, piv v'libo shavin. You have to actually intend what you say. If there's a disparity between intention and speech, it doesn't take effect. So this question about, we didn't really deal with the meta issues of neder. But the idea, though, so one question is it a good thing or a bad thing? It comes up in the next tractate, which I won't be reading, but tractate Nazir. There you have the question is front and center. Is it good to become a Nazir or not? And exactly for these reasons, because what are you taking more restrictions on yourself? You have 613, not 616, So that's where it comes up openly. But even here in Nedarim, it came up in the first mishnayot about Nidrei Rishayim. Okay, that's just.
Doesn't the Torah say not to make a neder?
No, the Torah says no. The Torah says
that
if you take a neder, you should keep it. The Torah doesn't say don't keep a neder. Where it says don't keep a neder, but don't make a neder, is in Kohelet. In Kohelet, this is the discussion. It's not in the Mishnah. In Kohelet, it says Tov asher lo tidar, mishet tidar v'lo tishalem. Chapter 5 of Kohelet. But that's a dispute among the Tanaim what that means. It says literally, better not to don't talk so much, don't say so many words. It's better that better not to make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it. Now the question is, what about taking a vow and keeping it? That's the question. So in other words, you can read it. Don't take any vows because you might not keep it. Or it might be saying, listen, if you took the vow, make sure you keep it. Those are two different ways to read it.
Well,
But
in Devarim it
that's
says you
incoherent.
should. In Devarim it says don't make a vow. If you make a vow, don't be late to keep it.
That's another problem. That's called Baal Ta'acher. Lo Ta'acher L'Shamo. That is a whole sugi in Rosh Hashanah. That's not here. That's in the second Rosh Hashanah. There's a whole Gemara. That's called Baal Ta'acher. It comes up in the Gemara. We're confining ourselves to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is just a gateway. I mean, the truth is, these topics are discussed at great length in the Gemara, the Rishonim, etc. Shulchan Aruch, it's a world. The idea of doing the Mishnah is it just gets us, it's an introduction to these big questions. So you're raising good questions, but Baal Ta'acher is the sugya in the first chapter of Rosh Hashanah. What does it mean not to delay? What does delaying mean? So that's a whole discussion about, that's a very interesting topic. That is true. That's called Baal Ta'acher. O Ta'acher L'Shamo. Okay, let me now, no problem. Now, let me touch upon, so the point about the Neder, I wanted to point out. So a Neder means that you can, in fact, forbid something which is otherwise permissible. This idea, just to deep digress for 1 second, this idea in general, that we can sort of extend what the Torah forbids, that human being has the power to extend what the Torah forbids, comes up in different contexts. I'll mention one context where it comes up, which is very interesting. It's not a neder per se, but it reminds me in a sense of a neder, and that is the idea of Tosefet Shabbat and Tosefet Yom Tov. In other words, when does Shabbos begin, right? So the point is, let's say in the summertime, people say, oh, I'm going to make Shabbos early. People say, I'm going to make Shabbos early. Now, what in the world does that mean to make Shabbos early? When the sun sets or when the stars come out, depending on different opinions, is when Shabbos begins. Shabbos sunset is 7:30. I'm going to make Shabbos at 6:30. Well, 1 second, but what do you mean you're going to start it early? But sunset is 7:30. No, so that's called Tosefet Shabbat. So people, you have the ability to actually to add on to the Shabbos. Now, whether that is a rabbinic business or whether it's from the Torah, that's a whole long discussion. Where it would be from the Torah, apparently where it comes up primarily is in Yom Kippur. There the Gemara speaks about actually you can start Yom Kippur early. And Tisha B'Chodesh Ba'erev, you can start. But this idea that the human being has the power to expand the divine word, that's a very interesting concept, actually. That speaks to a much broader topic as to what degree the Torah grants a certain kind of autonomy or power to the human being to expand God's word. In the case of Neder, to create things that are forbidden, etc. That's a whole other topic. But anyway, that's one topic which is very related to Neder. But I want to mention something else, which is in the Mishnah, probably one of the most central ideas of the Mishnah. And that is, and this comes up in a couple of different mishnayot, and that is the principle that I mentioned in the past. I just wanted to look at the Mishnah about this, that Nedarim, holoch acharei lushon b'nei adam. When it comes to making a neder, we follow the way, we adhere to the way people use language. In other words, if someone makes a statement, X is forbidden to me. What does X mean? Now let's take a look at the Mishnah for a moment, at Mishnah chapter 6. Let's look at Mishnah chapter 6, Mishnah number 1, let's say. Chapter 6, Mishnah 1. Yeah, see that? Chapter 6, Mishnah 1? 6:1, right. Nedarim min hamavusho. Gotta make that print a little smaller, you can't see it there. Nedarim min hamavusho, mutar batzli uvasholok. Okay? Let's see, how does the Mishnah translate that? You have the English as well? You have to scroll down. Right. Someone took a vow. Cooked foods are forbidden to me. Mavusha was also. Says the Mishnah, he is permitted to eat roasted over fire, and boiled foods. They are not defined as cooked. Now, here's the point. You have the word bishul. I say I'm not going to eat something which is mavushal. So I'm permitted to eat roasted food and boiled food. Now, here's the point. The question of bishul comes up in many, many halachot. It's forbidden to be mevashel on Shabbat. One of the malachot on Shabbat is bishul. Bishul is forbidden on Shabbat. The carbon pesach, the Torah says, when you bring a carbon pesach, when you eat the carbon pesach, tzliesh. It has to be boiled over, roasted over the fire. Carbon pesach has to be tzli. If it's mavushal, it is not a kosher carbon pesach. So now my point is, and bishul comes up in many other halachot. So when you're studying Shabbat, the question is, what does it mean you can't cook on Shabbos? Can you roast something on Shabbos? No. Can you boil something on Shabbos? No. In other words, the point is, in each of these various categories, halachot, there are halachic definitions of bishul. What this Mishnah is saying over here in chapter 6, Mishnah 1, and this goes on for 3 chapters, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, as we'll see in a minute, we even had it earlier. The Mishnah is making a simple point. There's millions of examples. Apparently they saw this is very central to the tractate. But the point is, if I say I'm not eating something which is mavushal, we don't look at the halachic category of bishul and say what falls under the category of bishul or not. And in different areas of halacha, there may be different definitions. We don't ask that. We ask a different question. In the town where this person made such a statement, when the person said bishul in this city, how do the people of the city understand bishul? The Nedarim haloch acharei lushon b'nei adam. What matters is not the halachic definition. What matters is the way people use language. And if you think about it, it makes a certain amount of sense, given the fact that the whole idea of a neder in the first place is a human-generated prohibition. Yes, it's sort of an expansion of the sanctity of the sacrifice, but at the end of the day, it's a human prohibition. So therefore, the Mishnah in 3 consecutive chapters, chapter 6, 7, and 8, they talk about defining what this word would mean, typically means in the parlance of people. But that can change from city to city. And the question that arises actually, which is discussed, it comes up in the Mishnah, and it comes up in the discussion among the commentaries, which is, what about a situation where the Torah gives a definition? In other words, let's take a look, for example, what we just saw is chapter 6, Mishnah 1. And it's chapter 6, 7, and 8. We're not going to go through all the examples, but there's 3 chapters of examples. So let's turn back to the earlier chapter, to Nedarim, chapter 3. Nedarim, chapter 3. This is let's say, for example, chapter 3, Mishnah 11. A couple of different examples here. The Mishnah starts at chapter 3, Mishnah 11. Konim she'eini nene livnei Noach. Muta b'Yisrael v'asr b'umot ha'olam. Person said the following, made the following neder. Remember, we saw this last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. Mudar hana'ah. You can make it. You can say this object is forbidden to me. This food is forbidden to me, and you can make another statement that I'm not going to benefit from another person, or that other person can't get a benefit from me. That's called the mudar hana'ah. We talked about that, and they might have a different set of rules than normally just this object is forbidden to me. Okay, so the person made a following statement. Someone said, something, I take a neder, I'm not going to get any benefit from B'nai Noach, from the children of Noach. Now, what does that mean? Obviously, the person does not mean to Noach's children, Shem, Cham, and Yefet, because Shem, Cham, and Yefet are long gone. So a Ben Noach, what is the Ben Noach? You could have interpreted a Ben Noach means a human being, right? Because we are B'nai Noach. The world, according to the Torah, the world is created. There's Adam and there's his family. And then there's Sheth, etc. Get down to Noach, and God said, I'll destroy the whole world, except for Noach and his immediate family may go on this ark. And they emerge from the ark, and from that family, the world is derived from Noach and Noach's children. So in a certain sense, every single human being is a ben Noach, right? But the Mishnah says no. If I say I'm not going to get a benefit from a ben Noach, what that means to say is I'm not going to get a benefit from any human being except Jews. From Jews, you're allowed to get a benefit. Why? Because the Jews are not b'nei Noach. What do you mean we're not b'nei Noach? We're all b'nei Noach. But it means that halachically, right? The ben Noach, we talk about the 7 commandments of the ben Noach. Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. Okay. But Yisrael has 613 mitzvot, right? So if I say I'm not going to benefit from ben Noach, says the Mishnah, I'm permitted to benefit from a Jew. I'm forbidden to benefit from a non-Jew, umot olam, any other nation. Now the second case in the Mishnah, she'eni nana with zera Avram. I'm not going to get a benefit from anybody who derives from Abraham. Also be Yisrael, umutar be umot olam. Then the Mishnah says, I'm forbidden to benefit from the Jews, but I'm permitted to benefit from all the other nations. Now, of course, you could ask the question, one second, but the Jews are not the only people that derive from Abraham. Abraham had Yishmael, and there are a lot of Ishmaelites around than there are Jews. And Abraham had 6 other children from Keturah, including the Midianites, the 6 kids. So Abraham has many, many, many more descendants than just the Jews. The Jews are a small minority of Abraham's descendants. But the Mishnah says, if I say I'm not going to get a benefit from Zerah Avram, it refers only to the Jews. Now the Gemara says, why should that be the case? And the Gemara says, because it has various drashot, various different, gave some kind of exegesis where Zerah Avram refers specifically to Jews and not to Yishmael even. Now here's the point. How does this Mishnah square with chapter 6 and chapter 7 and chapter 8? How does it square in general? What does it mean? Why do we have these rules? I understand the rules of chapter 6, 7, and 8, but this is chapter 3. Is chapter 3 different from 6, 7, and 8? And if it is different, in other words, if we're saying in chapter 3 that certain expressions, we go back to the Torah and we see how they're used, or we go back to the halacha. From a halachic standpoint, the Jews are not ben Noach, because the Jews have 613 commandments, and the Noachites have 7 Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. I understand that. But from a simple, just defining what the words mean, all those who descend from Noach and won't benefit from, well, the whole world descends from Noach, all humans. But that person seems to be saying, I will get no benefit from any human being. That's not what the Mishnah says. So now the question becomes the broader question, under what conditions do we follow what the Torah would say, or the halacha? Under what conditions do we say, forget all that? When it comes to a neder, we simply look at the way the words are used. I raised the question without resolving it yet, but this is the question, and there are ways to resolve it. There are ways to resolve it. One might say that when there's a clear definition from the words of the Torah or from the halacha, that becomes the default. If the person will come afterwards and explain, I didn't mean that, I meant this, that's another story. Because the person can come later and explain what he or she may have meant. But if the person does not explain, there's a certain default. Or do we say no? We say this is not true. There's only one rule. We follow what a person, the parlance of that particular place and time. The truth is that in the Talmud Yerushalmi, not in the Bavli, there is a dispute about, do we follow the Torah's language, or do we only always follow what people say? The Bavli doesn't have such a machloket, but in any event, it's up to, when you read the Mishnah, you got to try to figure this out. But I did want to emphasize that this idea of Lashon B'nei Adam, that when it comes to a neder, we follow what people say, because the neder itself, the whole idea of neder, is generated by people. And therefore, it makes sense that since it's all generated by people, one could make the argument we simply follow people's thinking and people's speech, which could change over time. It's also equally true, we saw in the Mishnah, that if someone comes later on and explains what they meant, Perusha and Lahaka, we had that Mishnah. When you make a statement, when you say, I didn't mean it, it's a word that's ambiguous. And afterwards, if you don't explain it, we take the more severe path, the more inclusive path. But if you explain it afterwards, I didn't mean that, I meant only this, then we follow your statement. We believe you, and that was your intention, and that is all that actually takes effect. So these are very core issues in the tractate. I'm not going to spend time going through all the various examples. There are about 30 or 40 examples of this. But this is the principle of Nedarim, haloch acharei lashon bnei adam. That was one point I wanted to emphasize in these mishnayot. I'll get to a second point in a moment. Before that, are there any comments or questions that we have so far?
Feel welcome to unmute yourself. And if you're in the attendee box, I can bring your questions forward. But I'm not seeing anything in the Zoom chat right now.
Okay, then we can just move on. I want to mention one other point before I get to, at least to touch upon the Hatarat Nedarim question. I want to point us towards a different Mishnah, which relates to what we saw last week. This is chapter 5, Mishnah number 6.
All right.
Chapter 5, Mishnah 6.
Yep, I hear. Just give me a moment to get that up.
Yes, okay, chapter 5, Mishnah 6. Now remember, last week, we had a Mishnah last week, which was chapter 4, Mishnah number 7 and 8. So there's chapter 4, bear this in mind, chapter 4, Mishnah 7 and 8 we saw last week. And now we're going to look at chapter 5, Mishnah number 6. The two mishnayot, it's interesting, they're very similar. And one Mishnah presumably is you have to work together with the mishnayot. Let's look at chapter 5, Mishnah number 6. It says the following: Hamuder hana mechavero, v'yein lo ma yochal, no riacher l'shum matana, v'yalo mutar ba. So let's say, for example, I say, so and so, my friend Joe, is not allowed to my friend Joe is not allowed to benefit from me. I forbid my friend Joe from benefiting from any kind of benefit from me. Fine. Now I discover that my friend Joe is bankrupt. He has no money. He has no food, and I feel bad. This is my friend Joe. Now, why did I say my friend Joe can't benefit from me? I have no idea. But in any event, I regret having done it, and Joe needs food. What did I do? Says the Mishnah, I have all kinds of delicious food. I give it to someone else as a gift. So I have a friend, Sid. I said, Sid, I have all this extra food in my house. Why don't you take my food? It's a gift to you. You know, it's a gift. And then Joe finds out about the food. It's not my food anymore. It belongs to Sid. So then Joe is allowed to come and eat at Sid's table. That's what the Mishnah says. We had very similar Mishnah last week we saw. And I think it was chapter 4. We saw a very similar thing. But now this Mishnah adds a caveat. This is the Mishnah adds the following situation. Now, the previous Mishnah, we had a very similar Mishnah back in chapter 4. There we had a case where the two of them, let's say chapter 4, Mishnah 8, to refresh our memory. Again, I said Joe can't get any benefit from me. Mishnah 4, chapter 8, chapter 4, Mishnah 8, me and Joe are walking together. And Joe has no food, and he can't benefit from me. I said, Joe can't have any of my food. It's identical. I can give it to someone as a gift, and Joe can eat it. What about if there's just me and Joe? Then what do I do? I can take my food, I put it on a rock. I say, the hefker. Anybody who wants it can take it. And then anybody can take it, including Joe. It's hefker. It doesn't belong to me anymore. So Joe can take it and eat. Rabbi Yossi forbids this. You can't do this as Rabbi Yossi, forbidden. Right. But since there's nobody else there, it's obviously being done just for the benefit of Joe. And Joe's not allowed to benefit from me. So according to Rabbi Yossi, it's forbidden. That's chapter 4 of Tractate Nedarim. Now look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah starts exactly the same way. Chapter 5, Mishnah 6. Exactly the same thing. Joe can't benefit from me. I can give it to Sid, and Joe can eat at Sid's table. But now we have an additional statement in the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Masa bi'echad bebeit choron. There was a certain incident that took place at a place called Beit Choron. Shaya aviv muder heimenu hana. Strange case. The person had said, "My father can't benefit from me." He had forsworn. He took a neder that all of my stuff is forbidden to my father. But now my son is getting married. There's a big wedding party. And his grandfather wants to come to the wedding. But his grandfather can't eat any of my food. What am I going to do? He wants his grandfather to come to the wedding. But I said my grandfather can't benefit from me. What's going to be? Talking about the meal. So what happened? So he said to his friend, you know what? I rented I have a big wedding in maybe my backyard. I have all this food, and my father, his father can't even enter his house, and he certainly can't eat his food. Whether he can enter his house, yes.
You're half cut off by the screen. Can you move towards the center?
I can't see my picture in the screen. I know where I am. Is this better or worse?
Worse, other way.
Better?
Sorry about that interruption.
Okay, no problem. Anyway, so there's a question in the Mishnah, which we didn't see. If I say someone can benefit from me, are they allowed to walk through my property? Okay, that's a question. Rabbi Eliezer in the Chachamim. Doesn't matter. The point is, so he's not forbidden to enter, it says, or to eat. So I say to my friend, you know what? I'm giving you a gift. My backyard is yours. And all the food in the backyard belongs to you. Fine. And then he said, I'm giving it to you because I want my father to come to the wedding. He has to come to the house. I want him to eat. So therefore it's yours. Amalo. So the guy said to him, Im shalihem, harehein muktashim lashamayim. He said, you know what? I'm so pleased you gave me this gift. I'm so happy that I got this gift today. You know what I'm going to do? Harehein hegdish. I am makdish, the yard, and all the stuff in the yard, I'm giving it to hegdish. I mean, giving it to the temple. All the stuff in the yard. Amalo. So the guy said to him, Lo nasati et shali shetakdi shem lashamayim. So he said, 1 second. I'm not giving them to you to give them hegdish. I'm giving them to you so that my father can come to the wedding. You're makdishem. What does that mean? Amalo. So the guy said, Lo natatali ela shalach. You gave me what's yours. Ela shetei atav v'avicha ochlim v'shotim u'mitratzim zeh lazeh v'hei avon tolui b'rosho. He says to him, in other words, Rosho, in other words, you want, right? You want to sin, right? In other words, what you're doing is you're causing a sin over here, he says. His friend says to him, if you only gave it to me, right? In order that the two of you should get along, But why should I be guilty for that reason? Right? Because the point is, he says to him, this is a fraud. You haven't really given it to me. You want to get along with your father. That's very lovely. But you're doing it in such a way that you're violating. You took a neder that your father can benefit from it. But in effect, you're not keeping the vow. This is just a devious way to avoid your responsibility. In other words, the guy says, "What do you mean I can't be makdish it? If I can't be makdish it, you never gave it to me. If you never gave it to me, then in effect your neder is still valid. So I'm not going to get involved in this kind of thing. If you gave it to me, it's mine. If you didn't give it to me, then it's yours. You tell me I can't do it what I want. I can't give it away. I can't be makdish it. What you're saying in effect is it's just a ruse. If it's just a ruse, you want me to get, then you're violating your vow. I don't want a part of that, he says. So they went to ask a question. They made the following statement. A gift, if I give you a gift and you can't give the gift away, which is the case over here, the guy complained, you can't be makdish it. I just gave it to you so I could have my father come to the wedding. So they brought the matter to the Chachamim, and the Chachamim said, any gift, but if the recipient of the gift doesn't have the power to give it away, that gift is invalid. In other words, in the case over here, what the Mishnah says, that gift would be invalid. And now the question is, how do you square Mishnah number 6 of chapter 5 with what we saw earlier? Because earlier the Mishnah didn't make that stipulation. You understand the question over here? The question is, it really touches I think, on the question that Debbie asked in the very beginning, which is, obviously over here, they're trying, the first Mishnah gives us a way to avoid what seems to be the result of taking a neder. Person takes a neder and says, my father can't benefit from me, not my food, not my house. But then the way life works out, we have a family simcha. And my son, who's getting married, wants his grandfather at his wedding. So what do you do with it? So that here there's a ruse. He says, okay, I'll give it to my friend. Listen, he says, it's all yours. But what? Oh, it's mine? Okay, so I'm giving it to Hagdish. You can't do that. I just gave it to you to avoid the problem. If that's giving it to me to avoid this issue, then you haven't given it to me. So the gift is not valid. So it's still yours. So you are violating your vow, and frankly, I wasn't a part of it. That's the question. Where do you draw the line? That's the question. You know, this comes up all the time. Exactly, this question comes up all the time. People sell their chametz. You have a store that sells its chametz. Let me ask you a question. People that sell their chametz. I'm not talking about selling their. You have a bottle of whiskey in your house, but there are stores that sell the chametz, and they have a lot of inventory there, and they sell it to a non-Jew. Does anybody expect the non-Jew to say after Pesach's over, I decided to keep it? Thank you very much I really appreciate the gift. Thank you very much. According to this Mishnah, the non-Jew has to be able to say that, because otherwise it's not a gift. On the other hand, from a realistic standpoint, maybe it happened once. Maybe what happens once in a blue moon. I've never heard of such a thing. So, there's a very fine line over here. It's really the question that we raised implicitly, or maybe explicitly, about what's called harama.
Harama. That's what I was going to say.
It's harama. It's getting around, and the question is harama in Jewish law. Where is there? It's not a simple matter, because we do have the selling of the chametz is clearly a kind of harama. Nobody believes, no one I ever met, believes that the non-Jew plans to keep it. And if the non-Jew did plan to keep it, they would never sell it to the non-Jew in the first place. So it's a harama. But actually, technically speaking, and this is probably the law, if the non-Jew said, I am keeping it, okay, then that's the end of that. The non-Jew has the right to keep it. I don't think next year anybody's going to give that particular non-Jew their chametz. But I mean, this is actually the question that's raised by the Mishnah. It's very striking that these two mishnayot are a chapter apart. The first Mishnah is in end of chapter 4, and the second Mishnah is the end of chapter 5. Now, it is true that in the Mishnah in chapter 4, Rabbi Yossi Osef, we have the opinion of Rabbi Yossi who actually forbids this. But the case of Rabbi Yossi forbidding it is even more than the case over here. It's where the two of them are walking alone. And the person takes his chametz, takes his food and puts it on a rock and says, anybody who wants it can take it. It's hefker. Rabbi Yossi says, no, but anybody who wants it. There's no one else around. This is the only guy that's there. They're walking alone. So in that case, says Rabbi Yossi, that's an obvious ploy. That's going too far. That's how Rama we can't abide. That's Rabbi Yossi. But what about the case over here? The case over here is, I think, much more complicated case. Just on a human level, it's a very complicated case. So this is called Maseh B'Beit Choron. That's what it's in the literature. It's called Maseh B'Beit Choron, and this is where it's an obvious ploy. And this is the principle in theory. If you give someone a gift, they have to have the power to give it away. If they can't give it away, then it's actually not a gift. Now, I'll tell you where this comes up in a different context. It comes up in the following case. It's something called the Matana Amanat Lahachzir. A Matana Amanat Lahachzir, I give you a gift on condition that you will return it to me. That's not the same as over here, because I give you a gift on condition you return it within 10 days or something like that. That gift is a valid gift. A Matana Amanat Lahachzir. That's not exactly the same. A Matana Amanat Lahachzir, you own it now fully. But there's a condition you have to return it later. Here the point is, it was never a gift to begin with. So that's not the same thing. But these are interesting discussions. A matana, Amanat Lahachzir, comes up in different contexts of halacha. In any event, I wanted to look at this Mishnah today just because last week we saw the Mishnah in chapter 4, and now I wanted to look at the Mishnah in chapter 5. Okay, let me say the following. Missing next week, let me say a few words about the Mishnah in chapter 9.
Excuse me. So a matana
Yes.
Amanat Lahachzir couldn't be food.
Oh, it could be food. You can't eat it. Right.
Right?
Right. It typically wouldn't be food. You know where it comes up? I'll tell you where it comes up. It comes up on the first day of Chag HaSukkot. On Sukkot. Because on Sukkot,
You have to own the lulav?
you have to own yes, that would mean him. The lulav has to be yours. You shall take on the first day the arbamid, the lulav, the etrog, the adasim, and the aravo. The Torah Gemara says that the first day it has to be yours. On the second day or the third day, second day in Israel, you can borrow a lulav. But on the first day, it's got to be yours. Now, what do you do in places when not everybody has a lulav? And in Europe, there were some towns where very few people had a lulav. But it's got to be yours. But if I give it, so if I give it to you, right? So if I give it to you and you keep it, I can't be yotzei the mitzvah. The question which comes up is, how do you give it? Suppose someone has a child, and they want the child. This is where the question comes up. I just mentioned, I don't want to get into this, but say you have a child who's not bar mitzvah or bar mitzvah, and you want to give the child the lulav. So you give the child the lulav. If you give a child a lulav, according to Tosfot and many opinions, if I decide I want to give the child the lulav, even though the child doesn't have full dot yet, because the child's not a gadol, it's a katan. But if I intend, if you give it, if you're augment to the child, then the child owns the lulav. The problem is, the child can't give it back to you. The child doesn't have the dot to return it. So the question is, how do you give a child a lulav on Sukkot if you want to use it yourself? Because it won't be yours. It'll be hers. That is true. But then it won't be yours. That's where this question, matana Amanat Lahachzir, comes up. It comes up in other cases as well. In any event, let me say, since we have still more time, I want to say something about the last 3 chapters of this Masechet. The last 3 chapters of the Masechet, the chapter 9 deals with Hatarat Nedarim, that we discussed briefly. That is where you take a neder, and then you regret having made the neder. Something comes up. Something you didn't think of comes up. We'll discuss this next time we meet. something comes up, then according to the Mishnah, you can get out of the neder by going to a beit din. The beit din, according to the Mishnah, consists either of one expert or of three non-experts. And they can do what's called hatarat nedarim. The question is, under what conditions can they do hatarat nedarim? If it's an obvious just mistake, just you didn't intend it in the first place, you don't need a beit din. That we saw earlier in the third parak, that there are four kinds of nedarim that in and of themselves are abrogated because you never intended it. Nidrei zruzin, nidrei havai, nidrei shkagot, nidrei anasim. Those are vows that simply never take effect. But what about when the vow does take effect? Then you can still get out of it, but in order to get out of it, you have to do what's called hatarat nedarim. Now the Mishnah says, not here, but the Mishnah in Tractate Chagiga, famous Mishnah in Chagiga, which is the last tractate of Masechet Moed, has the very famous statement, Heten nedarim pokin ba'avir. The ability to annul vows floats in the air, and there is no basis for it. Not only is there no basis for it, there's an anti-basis for it, because you see in the Bible, when someone takes a neder, they have to keep the neder. Even when they took it, even when it wasn't, even there was something they didn't know. The Bible knows nothing about hatarat nedarim. The Mishnah says it. Heter nedarim pochin ba'avir, v'yenu ha'amash yismochu. So this is one of the great chidushim of the rabbinic tradition, something called hatarat nedarim. According to some, that's what kol nidre is. Kol nidre, according to many authorities, is hatarat nedarim, a kind of ceremonial hatarat nedarim. Now, there is no basis in the text for it, so maybe we'll discuss next time, is there some kind of basis? What there is a basis for in the text is not hatarat nedarim, but rather hafarat nedarim. Hafarat nedarim is an entire chapter in the Torah, which is chapter 30 of Bamidbar. And as I mentioned, that's where a woman, either a young woman, not a woman, a child basically, before she's bat mitzvah, she took a neder or a shvua, and the Torah says that when the father hears about it, he can annul the vow. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. That's called hafarat nedarim, and the same thing is true if the husband, she's married, and the husband hears about it, he can also annul her vows. That's called hafarat nedarim. The last two chapters of this tractate deal with hafarat nedarim, and that's why, according to many, tractate nedarim is in Seder Nashim to begin with. What does it have to do with women, nedarim? Nothing. A man can take a vow, a woman can take a vow. But since the parsha of vows, as understood by the Mishnah, is in chapter 30 of Bamidbar in the context of the husband's right to annul his wife's vows, or the father's right to annul his daughter's vows, that's how this all creeps into a tractate, Seder Nashim. In any event, chapter 10 and 11 are about hafarat nedarim. Chapter 9 is about hatarat nedarim. And the Mishnah will talk about under what conditions you can do hatarat nedarim. That's one question. And the second question that will come up in the Mishnah, which is a very interesting question, is when someone comes to court to be matir neder, who takes the initiative? Someone walks in, does the court say, I hear you're coming to be matir the neder? Let us tell you how to do it. Does the court take the initiative or no? The court says, what do you want? And the person coming to the court, they have to try to argue their case before the court. To what extent is the court proactive in the annulment of vows? To what extent not? That's an issue in the ninth parak. That's something we'll talk about next time. Next time I want to focus on hatarat nedarim, and also we can't do everything, but hafarat nedarim, and the Mishnah will have several interesting principles about hatarat nedarim and about hafarat nedarim. Let me stop for a second. Are there any questions or comments about anything we've done till now?
No comments in chat, but do feel free, welcome to speak out.
I have another question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You had said about a week ago or 2 weeks ago that there's no specific formula when you make a neder. But it seemed to me when I was learning it that it said that you had to say ke, or if you said le, it didn't work. That there was a specific way that you had to, specific language you had to use in order to formulate a neder. So what did you
No,
mean? What am I misunderstanding?
No, you're not misunderstanding. There is, right, no, there are certain, no, the Mishnah dealt with in the beginning of the tractate,
Right.
certain words, what they imply. That is for sure. In other words, the point is, you can forbid anything you want. Say a neder, for example, as long as it's clear. This particular thing has to be a thing. This thing is forbidden to me.
Right.
I can forbid it to me to benefit from. I can forbid it to me to eat, but it just has to be clear from the words that you're using that what you intend to do is to forbid it. And what you're saying is that this object, there is
and it's an item, not an action.
An item. Neder is always an item. Neder, shavua is an action. Neder is an item, and neder has to be formulated in such a way that the words are clear. You say lo x. Does lo mean lo x, or does lo mean towards, or inclusive of? Those kinds of questions are yes. I would say that in general, when it comes to neder, one of the things that is clear from in many different, we had this today, L'shon b'nei Adam, what the mishnayot are focused in on is the language. And the ability of language that my speech can actually change something which is perfectly permissible into something which becomes forbidden, like a Torah prohibition. That's a remarkable idea, actually, if you think about it. Because one could have easily said, you can't, how can you do that? The Torah says you can't eat certain animals that are not kosher. I got it. But here you have a tuna fish sandwich. This is forbidden to me. It's not, can't be forbidden to you. The Torah says it's permissible. So comes along the Nedarim and says, no, you can actually make this thing forbidden to you, provided that it's clear that's what you're saying. But I'm not suggesting that you don't need clarity of speech. We need clarity. It's true that the Mishnah also says that when a statement is ambiguous, then if we don't know any one way or the other, we take the more severe approach.
Right.
But if the person comes afterwards and says,
and clarifies,
oh, he meant this, to clarify, then the right of clarification is with the person. We go, the Nedarim suffix lahachmil uperushan lahakil. That's the Mishnah. So again, the person has the right to explain, but it's all coming from the same place, which is fundamentally it's a human created prohibition. Now, I didn't say that. In other words, the clarity of speech you need. The question the Mishnah raises is what certain words may mean. Certain words are by themselves ambiguous, and we don't know what they mean. And that's how do you figure out what they mean? So L'shon b'nei Adam is one way. You say, in this community, what does this word mean? Maybe it's something different in a different community, in which case you follow the community. To what extent can a person clarify? I would say to a great extent. There are some things beyond which you can't just say, just it makes no sense. I said this sandwich is I didn't mean the sandwich, I meant my television set. No, that's not a clarification. That's nonsense. So again, it's a question of judgment, but for sure. Next time we will focus in on, again, chapter 9, 10, 11. I don't know if we meet twice more or only once more. I have to check on that. Okay, we'll stop at this point then. So next time we have to 9, 10, and 11. So the real heart and soul of the tractate, in a certain sense, is 9, 10, and 11. And we'll deal with that in 2 weeks. Okay. Very good. See you hopefully in 2 weeks. We have other programming as well, including Tiny Esther. There's a special shiur I'm giving on Tiny Esther at 8:30 at night, after Tiny Esther, about Purim after October 7th, celebration of Purim.
And I'm posting the link for that in the chat right now. You can sign up. You can join us on 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. And this class will continue. Our last session will be on the 31st. And then we will continue with Nazir with Rav A.V. Wolfish at the same time, same date. Please stay tuned for the sign up for that. But thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for learning, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.